There exists a story within the story of Auschwitz that has rarely been told in its full complexity. While the world knows the documented horrors of this death camp, the gas chambers, the crematoria, the systematic murder of over 1 million people, few know about the extraordinary network of resistance that operated in the shadows, the documents that were buried to preserve truth, the photographs smuggled out at the cost of lives, and the details from trials that revealed secrets kept hidden for decades. Recently declassified archives, survivor testimonies that emerged only in recent years, and forensic investigations have unveiled aspects of Auschwitz that challenge our understanding not by denying the known horrors, but by adding layers of human courage, organized resistance, and the desperate struggle to preserve evidence that makes this history even more crucial to remember and understand. What you are about to discover is not conspiracy theory or revisionist history. These are documented truths based on archaeological findings, declassified intelligence reports, court testimonies, and the words of survivors who waited decades to speak. This is the story of prisoners who became secret photographers, resistance fighters who sabotaged Nazi operations from within, documents buried in the ground that would become crucial evidence, guards who secretly helped victims at risk of their own lives, and the complex web of industrial collaboration that made Auschwitz possible. The history of Auschwitz is often presented as a narrative of helpless victims and evil perpetrators. While that fundamental truth remains, the complete story is more complex. It includes acts of resistance that the Nazis desperately tried to suppress, evidence that prisoners risked everything to preserve, escape attempts that sometimes succeeded against impossible odds, and an underground network of courage that operated even in humanity's darkest place. Understanding these hidden dimensions doesn't minimize the Holocaust's horrors. Instead, it honors those who fought against evil even in the most impossible circumstances. It reveals how truth survived despite systematic attempts to destroy all evidence. It shows that even in a place designed to strip away all humanity, the human spirit found ways to resist, to document, and to ensure that future generations would know exactly what happened. This story begins not with the camp's liberation in 1945, but years earlier, with the first prisoners who recognized they were witnessing something the world needed to know about, and who made the extraordinary decision to risk everything to preserve that truth for a future they might never see. The hidden resistance. When Auschwitz was established in 1940, initially as a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners, few could have imagined it would become the largest killing center in human history. But some of those early prisoners immediately recognized the need to document what was happening and to organize resistance, no matter how impossible that seemed. Witold Pilecki stands as one of the most remarkable figures in this hidden history. In September 1940, this Polish cavalry officer voluntarily walked into a German roundup in Warsaw, allowing himself to be captured and sent to Auschwitz with a mission that seems almost suicidal in retrospect. His goal? Infiltrate the camp, organize resistance, gather intelligence, and get information to the outside world about what was really happening there. For nearly 3 years, Pilecki lived inside Auschwitz. He organized a resistance network called the Union of Military Organizations, ZAO, that eventually included hundreds of prisoners. They created an intelligence network, smuggled information out through released prisoners and cooperative civilians, improved prisoner survival by stealing food and medicine, and prepared for a potential uprising coordinated with an outside attack that never came. Pilecki's reports, smuggled out beginning in 1941, were among the first detailed accounts to reach the Western Allies about the true nature of Auschwitz. He described the systematic murder, the conditions, the daily death toll, and the expansion of the camp. His 1943 report, Witold's report, provided detailed information about the camp's layout, SS personnel, and operations. Tragically, these reports were largely dismissed or not acted upon by Allied intelligence, who found the accounts too horrific to be credible, or who had other strategic priorities. In April 1943, after nearly 3 years inside, Pilecki escaped during a night shift at a camp bakery, carrying detailed intelligence about the camp's operations. He would survive the war only to be executed by the communist Polish government in 1948 on fabricated charges. His story remained largely unknown until decades after his death, suppressed by communist authorities who saw him as a potential threat. But Pilecki was not the only one organizing resistance. Throughout Auschwitz's operation, prisoners formed clandestine networks organized along national, political, and social lines. The Polish resistance was among the first and most organized. But Jewish prisoners, Soviet POWs, and others also created underground structures despite the constant threat of discovery and execution. These resistance groups engaged in several types of activities. They stole and distributed food and medicine to help prisoners survive. They maintained morale through secret cultural activities, religious observances, and education. They gathered and preserved intelligence about SS personnel and camp operations. They sabotaged production when possible, particularly in the forced labor factories. And they planned for potential uprisings, knowing the odds of success were minimal, but refusing to surrender completely to Nazi control. The most dramatic act of resistance came from an unexpected source: the Sonderkommando, the prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoria. The Nazis deliberately selected these workers from new arrivals, forcing them to assist in the murder process with the cynical promise of temporarily extended life. Every few months, the entire Sonderkommando would be murdered and replaced to eliminate witnesses to the killing process. Living with this unbearable burden, some Sonderkommando members made an extraordinary decision. If they were going to die anyway, they would at least leave evidence of what happened and attempt to resist. This led to two of the most significant acts of resistance in Auschwitz's history: the secret photographs and the Sonderkommando uprising. In August 1944, members of the Sonderkommando at Crematorium 5 secretly obtained a camera. In an act of incredible courage, they took 4 photographs showing the burning of bodies in outdoor pits and naked women being driven toward the gas chamber. These images, blurry and shot from hiding, are among the only photographic evidence of the extermination process actually in operation. The film was smuggled out of the camp hidden in a toothpaste tube and delivered to the Polish resistance. These photographs survived the war and remain among the most powerful evidence of the Holocaust. That same autumn, the Sonderkommando organized an uprising. 4 Jewish women who worked in the nearby Union munitions factory, Alla Gertner, Regina Safferstein, Estera Weichblum, and Rosa Robota, smuggled tiny amounts of explosives over weeks and months, passing them to Sonderkommando members. The plan was for a coordinated uprising across all 4 crematoria, but circumstances forced a premature action. On October 7, 1944, when the Sonderkommando of Crematorium IV learned they were about to be killed, they launched their revolt. Using the smuggled explosives and improvised weapons, they attacked the SS guards, killed several, and destroyed Crematorium IV. Prisoners from Crematorium II also rose up, killing guards and cutting through the fence before being hunted down and shot. The uprising was ultimately suppressed with hundreds of Sonderkommando members killed, but they had achieved something the Nazis never expected. They had destroyed one of the killing facilities and demonstrated that resistance was possible even in the most controlled environment the Nazis had created. The 4 women who had smuggled the explosives were arrested, tortured for weeks to reveal their network, but never gave up additional names. They were publicly hanged in January 1945, just weeks before the camp's liberation, as the SS sought to make an example of them. These acts of resistance, Pilecki's network, the secret photographs, the uprising, represent only the most dramatic examples. Every day, prisoners engaged in smaller acts of resistance that helped others survive, sharing food, providing medical care, maintaining human dignity through cultural and religious activities, and preserving the will to live and testify about what they had witnessed. Buried documents and preserved truth. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Auschwitz's hidden history is the systematic effort by prisoners to document the crimes they witnessed and to preserve that evidence for posterity, even though most knew they would not survive to testify themselves. The members of the Sonderkommando faced a unique horror. Forced to assist in the murder of their own people, living on borrowed time before their own inevitable execution, they grappled with unbearable moral anguish. Some made a profound decision. They would create a record that would survive even if they did not. Between 1942 and 1944, Several Sonderkommando members wrote detailed testimonies describing the extermination process, the daily routines, the reactions of victims, the behaviors of SS personnel, and their own psychological torment. Written in Yiddish, Hebrew, and Polish, these manuscripts were hidden in bottles, metal containers, and buried in the ground around the crematoria. Zalman Gradowski was one of the most prolific of these secret chroniclers. Before his death in the October 1944 uprising, he buried detailed manuscripts describing the killing process, the reactions of victims, conversations he had overheard, and his own spiritual struggle. In one heartbreaking passage, he wrote directly to whoever might find his words. "Dear finder, search everywhere in every inch of soil. Dozens of documents are buried under it, mine and those of other persons, which will throw light on everything that was happening here." Gradowski's manuscripts were discovered in 1945 and again in 1961, preserved in containers he had carefully sealed and hidden. His words provided detailed evidence used in subsequent trials and remain among the most important first-hand testimonies of the Holocaust. Lieb Langfuss wrote another crucial manuscript buried near Crematorium III. Discovered in 1952, his testimony described specific details about the extermination process, named individual SS perpetrators, and documented the psychological effects on the Sonderkommando members themselves. He wrote, "I am writing these words in a moment of terrible spiritual anguish. I am writing this in full consciousness that these may be my last words." Other manuscripts were discovered in 1962, 1970, and as recently as 1980, decades after the war ended. Each discovery added crucial details to the historical record. These buried testimonies corroborated survivor accounts, provided specific information about perpetrators, described the evolution of the killing methods, and offered intimate glimpses into the emotional and spiritual struggles of those facing certain death. The Scrolls of Auschwitz, as these manuscripts became known, were written under impossible conditions. Paper was scarce and dangerous to possess. Writing materials had to be stolen or improvised. The authors worked in secret, knowing discovery meant immediate execution. Yet they persisted, driven by the determination that the world must know the truth. Beyond the Sonderkommando manuscripts, other prisoners found ways to document the camp. Some kept secret diaries, writing on scraps of paper and hiding them in clothing, walls, or buried containers. Artists created clandestine drawings depicting camp life, executions, and conditions. These works of art were hidden and later recovered, providing visual documentation that complemented written testimonies. Dr. Miklos Niszli, a Hungarian Jewish doctor forced to assist Joseph Mengele in his medical experiments, secretly documented the procedures he witnessed and survived the war to publish his account. His testimony provided detailed evidence about Mengele's experiments on twins, his selections, and the medical atrocities conducted in the name of Nazi racial science. Women prisoners in the Canada Commando, the detail that sorted possessions stolen from murdered prisoners, secretly documented the massive scale of theft. They described warehouses filled with clothing, shoes, eyeglasses, hair, and valuables taken from the dead. These testimonies helped trace the extensive network of collaboration between the SS and German industry and government that processed the stolen goods. The effort to preserve evidence extended beyond individual testimonies. The camp resistance movement maintained lists of SS personnel, documented specific crimes by particular guards, and recorded the names of prisoners to preserve their memory. These lists, compiled at tremendous risk, became crucial evidence in post-war trials and helped identify perpetrators who tried to disappear into civilian life after the war. What makes these documentation efforts even more remarkable is that the prisoners creating them knew the Nazis were simultaneously trying to destroy all evidence. As the Soviet army approached in late 1944 and early 1945, the SS began a systematic effort to demolish the gas chambers and crematoria, burn documents, and eliminate witnesses. Despite these efforts, the buried manuscripts, hidden drawings, and smuggled testimonies survived, ensuring that truth would outlive the attempt to conceal it. The perpetrators and those who helped the personnel who ran Auschwitz ranged from ideological fanatics who enthusiastically participated in genocide to bureaucrats who saw it as a job to individuals who were complicit through inaction. Understanding this spectrum is crucial to comprehending how such systematic evil functioned, but it also reveals the rare individuals who made different choices. Rudolf Höss served as Auschwitz commandant from 1940 to 1943, and again briefly in 1944. After the war, he was captured, testified at Nuremberg, and wrote detailed memoirs before his execution in 1947. His testimony provided crucial evidence about the camp's operations, the decision-making process behind the mass murder, and the administrative details of genocide. Höss described the killing process with chilling bureaucratic detachment, discussing the efficiency of different poison gas formulations and the capacity of the crematoria like an industrial manager discussing factory output. His testimony revealed that Auschwitz was not a chaotic outburst of violence, but a carefully planned and administered operation. He described receiving orders from Himmler in 1941 to prepare the camp for mass extermination, the construction of the gas chambers, the selection of Zyklon B poison gas, and the continuous effort to increase killing capacity. His words demonstrated that the Holocaust was not a secret to German leadership, but a deliberate policy implemented through normal governmental and military chains of command. Dr. Joseph Mengele, the camp physician, became the symbol of Nazi medical crimes. He personally conducted selections on the arrival ramp, deciding who would be immediately killed and who would be temporarily spared for forced labor. But his particular infamy comes from his experiments, especially on twins, which combined pseudoscientific racial research with sadistic cruelty. Mengele escaped capture after the war and lived in South America until his death in 1979. His escape was facilitated by networks of Nazi sympathizers and the failure of various governments to prioritize his capture. The fact that such a prominent war criminal evaded justice for decades revealed uncomfortable truths about post-war priorities and the limits of accountability. However, the story of Auschwitz personnel is not uniformly one of enthusiastic participation in genocide. Dr. Hans Münch, an SS physician at Auschwitz, represents a different choice. Assigned to the camp in 1943, Münch refused to participate in selections for the gas chambers, claiming it was not part of his medical duties. He focused instead on research into typhus prevention, which, while still serving the Nazi system, did not directly involve murder. More significantly, Münch secretly helped prisoners when he could. He provided medical care beyond what was officially allowed, warned prisoners about upcoming selections, and shared information that helped some survive. After the war, multiple survivors testified on his behalf. In the Auschwitz trials in Krakow, he was acquitted, the only SS physician from Auschwitz to be found not guilty. Until his death in 2001, Münch gave extensive testimony about Auschwitz, providing detailed information about the camp's operations, the selection process, medical experiments, and the SS personnel structure. His testimony was valuable precisely because, as a perpetrator who acknowledged the reality of the Holocaust, he could describe the system from the inside while also demonstrating that individuals within that system had made different choices. Oskar Gröning, known as the accountant of Auschwitz, worked in the section that processed valuables stolen from murdered prisoners. For decades after the war, he lived quietly in Germany. But in the 1990s, disturbed by Holocaust deniers, he began speaking publicly about his experiences, providing detailed testimony about how Auschwitz functioned. In 2015, at age 93, Gröning was finally tried and convicted as an accessory to 300,000 murders. His trial revealed details about the administrative and financial systems that supported the genocide. He described the warehouses filled with stolen goods, the processing of currency and valuables, and the bureaucratic machinery that turned mass murder into routine paperwork. His testimony demonstrated that the Holocaust required not just murderous fanatics, but also ordinary people willing to perform administrative tasks that facilitated genocide. Beyond the SS personnel, the story of Auschwitz involves thousands of German civilians and businesses. IG Farben built a massive factory complex at Auschwitz III Monowitz, using slave labor from the camp. Siemens, Krupp, and other major German corporations operated facilities using Auschwitz prisoners as workers who were literally worked to death and replaced. After the war, some IG Farben executives were tried at Nuremberg in the Farben trial. Evidence revealed that company officials knew exactly what was happening at Auschwitz, had selected the location precisely because of access to forced labor, and had directly participated in decisions about prisoner treatment. Yet the sentences were relatively light, and many convicted executives returned to prominent positions in post-war German industry, revealing the limits of accountability when powerful economic interests were involved. There were also non-German personnel at Auschwitz. Ukrainian, Lithuanian, and other Eastern European guards were recruited or coerced into service. Some participated enthusiastically in atrocities, while others were trapped by circumstances, facing death if they refused service. This complexity doesn't excuse participation in genocide, but it reveals how the Nazi system created situations where ordinary people became complicit in extraordinary evil. Remarkably, there were also a handful of cases of guards who secretly helped prisoners. These cases were rare and dangerous. Helping prisoners meant risking execution. Some guards passed messages, provided extra food, or warned of upcoming selections. Most of these individuals remain anonymous, known only through survivor testimonies, mentioning an unnamed guard who committed some small act of humanity in an inhuman place. Trials, testimony, and revealed secrets. The full truth about Auschwitz emerged gradually over decades through multiple waves of trials, each revealing details that had been hidden, denied, or simply not addressed in previous proceedings. This extended process of justice and truth-telling demonstrates how historical understanding evolves as new evidence emerges and societies become willing to confront uncomfortable realities. The first major trials occurred in Poland immediately after the war. Rudolf Höss and other Auschwitz personnel were tried in Krakow in 1947. These trials established the basic facts about the camp's operation and resulted in death sentences for the most prominent perpetrators. However, they received relatively little international attention, occurring in the shadow of the more prominent Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials, 1945-1946, addressed the broader Nazi leadership and crimes against humanity. While Auschwitz was discussed, it was one atrocity among many. The focus was on proving the conspiracy to wage aggressive war and establishing the principle that individuals could be held accountable for crimes against humanity and genocide. The full details about specific camps like Auschwitz were not the central focus. It was the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in 1961 that brought Holocaust survivor testimony to global attention. Adolf Eichmann, the logistics coordinator of the Holocaust, was captured in Argentina by Israeli intelligence and tried in Israel. The trial featured extensive testimony from Auschwitz survivors, providing detailed first-hand accounts that reached a worldwide audience through television coverage. The Eichmann trial transformed public understanding of the Holocaust. For the first time, many people heard directly from survivors about their experiences. The testimony was emotional, detailed, and impossible to dismiss. Survivors described the arrival at Auschwitz, the selection process, the conditions in the camp, and the constant presence of death. Their words made abstract statistics personal and undeniable. But the most detailed revelations about Auschwitz came from the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, 1963-1965. These trials prosecuted 22 defendants who had worked at Auschwitz in various capacities: guards, administrators, and medical personnel. The proceedings lasted 20 months and heard testimony from over 350 witnesses, including 211 survivors. The Frankfurt trials revealed details about Auschwitz that had not been widely known. Survivors testified about specific perpetrators and particular atrocities. They described Joseph Mengelé's experiments on twins, forced sterilizations, medical murders, and the daily brutality of camp life. They named guards who were particularly cruel, described the hierarchy among prisoners, and explained the systems that governed life and death in the camp. The trials also exposed how many Auschwitz personnel had returned to normal lives in West Germany without facing justice. Some had even returned to respected positions, as teachers, business people, and civil servants. The trials forced German society to confront the reality that perpetrators of genocide were living among them, often in plain sight. The testimony from the Frankfurt trials filled 18,000 pages of transcripts. This massive record became an invaluable historical source, providing detailed evidence about camp operations, specific crimes, and the administrative structure that made systematic murder possible. The trials resulted in only 6 life sentences and various shorter prison terms, which many survivors and observers found inadequate given the scale of crimes. However, the historical record created by the proceedings proved invaluable. Other trials continued sporadically for decades. In the 1970s and 1980s, additional Auschwitz personnel were prosecuted as new evidence emerged, or as political will developed to pursue cases that had been ignored. Each trial added details to the historical record and provided some measure of justice, however delayed. John Demjanjuk's trial in Germany, 2009-2011, established a new legal precedent. Demjanjuk, accused of serving as a guard at Sobibor, was convicted not for specific individual acts, but simply for serving as a guard at an extermination camp, making him an accessory to all murders that occurred during his service. This precedent enabled prosecution of aging camp personnel even when specific individual crimes could not be proven. This legal principle was then applied in the prosecution of Oskar Groening in 2015 and several other elderly former Auschwitz personnel in subsequent years. These late trials revealed details about administrative and support functions at Auschwitz, the accountants who processed stolen property, the clerks who maintained records, the guards who maintained perimeter security. The testimony demonstrated that genocide required not just murderers, but an entire system of support personnel who enabled the killing process. Declassified intelligence documents have continued to reveal new information. In recent years, researchers have uncovered evidence that Allied intelligence knew far more about Auschwitz far earlier than was long believed. Aerial reconnaissance photographs from 1944 clearly showed the camp, the gas chambers, and even prisoners being led to their deaths. These photographs, only fully analyzed decades after the war, raise uncomfortable questions about why the Allies did not bomb the camp or the rail lines leading to it. Archives in former Soviet territories, opened after the Cold War ended, revealed additional evidence about Auschwitz. Soviet forces had seized massive amounts of documentation when they liberated the camp in January 1945. Much of this material remained classified or inaccessible for decades. As it became available to researchers, it added details about the camp's operations, the treatment of Soviet POWs, and the final days before liberation. Survivor testimony has also continued to evolve. Many survivors could not speak about their experiences for decades due to trauma, lack of interested audiences, or practical demands of rebuilding lives. Starting in the 1980s and accelerating in the 1990s and 2000s, many elderly survivors began giving extensive testimony, driven by the realization that first-hand witnesses would soon be gone, and by the emergence of Holocaust denial that motivated them to speak while they still could. The USC Shoah Foundation, established in 1994, recorded over 50,000 survivor testimonies, many providing details about Auschwitz that had never been formally documented. These video testimonies preserve not just facts but the emotional reality of survival, the long-term trauma, and the personal details that make historical events human and real. Conclusion and legacy. The secrets of Auschwitz are not conspiracy theories or denial of established facts. They are the additional layers of truth that make the history more complete. The extraordinary resistance by prisoners who refused to be merely victims, the documentation efforts by those who knew they would die but were determined that truth would survive, the complex landscape of perpetrators ranging from ideological zealots to bureaucratic facilitators, and the long process of justice and truth-telling that continued for decades. Understanding these hidden dimensions serves multiple crucial purposes. First, it honors the full humanity of the victims and survivors. The standard narrative of helpless victims facing overwhelming evil is true but incomplete. Many prisoners actively resisted, documented crimes, maintained human dignity, and fought against their oppressors in ways large and small. Recognizing this resistance respects their agency and courage. Second, understanding the documentation efforts, the manuscripts buried by the Sonderkommando, the secret photographs, the hidden diaries, reveals the power of truth and the human determination to bear witness even in the face of certain death. These individuals created the evidence that would later convict perpetrators and refute deniers. Their efforts demonstrate that truth can survive attempts to destroy it if people are willing to sacrifice to preserve it. Third, examining the perpetrators in their full complexity helps us understand how ordinary people become complicit in extraordinary evil. Auschwitz was not operated solely by sadistic monsters, but also by bureaucrats, clerks, doctors, and guards who made daily choices to participate in, facilitate, or ignore genocide. Understanding this is crucial to preventing future atrocities, as it reveals that the greatest danger comes not just from ideological extremists, but from ordinary people willing to go along with evil systems. Fourth, the long history of trials and revelations demonstrates that historical truth emerges gradually and that the pursuit of justice must be persistent. Many Auschwitz perpetrators escaped accountability for decades. Some were never prosecuted. But the continued efforts to pursue truth and justice, even when delayed, reaffirm the principle that crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations and that societies must confront their past honestly, however uncomfortable that may be. The story of Auschwitz continues to evolve as new evidence emerges. Archaeological excavations at the site continue to uncover artifacts and evidence. Researchers continue to find new documents in archives. The last survivors continue to provide testimony while they still can. Each new piece of evidence adds to our understanding. The lessons of Auschwitz extend far beyond the specific historical events. The camp represents what becomes possible when societies abandon human rights, embrace racist ideologies, dehumanize selected groups, and allow bureaucratic systems to implement evil policies. It demonstrates how industrial capacity and modern organization can be turned toward mass murder. It shows how ordinary people can become complicit in genocide through small compromises and bureaucratic participation. But the hidden stories of Auschwitz also demonstrate human resilience, the power of resistance, and the determination to preserve truth against overwhelming odds. Witold Pilecki's voluntary infiltration and 3-year resistance network, the Sonderkommando's uprising and secret photographs, the manuscripts buried by men who knew they would die, the 4 women who smuggled explosives knowing they would be tortured and executed. These stories show that even in humanity's darkest place, people found ways to fight, to document, and to ensure that truth would survive. As the last survivors pass away and Auschwitz becomes increasingly distant in time, preserving the complete truth becomes more crucial. This means not just teaching about the genocide, but also about the resistance, not just learning about the perpetrators, but also understanding how ordinary people became complicit. Not just honoring the dead, but also recognizing those who fought to preserve evidence and dignity. The physical site of Auschwitz-Birkenau, preserved as a museum and memorial, receives over 2 million visitors annually. Walking through the camp, seeing the barracks, the remains of the gas chambers, the rooms full of shoes and belongings stolen from victims, makes the history tangible in ways that words cannot fully convey. But understanding the hidden histories, knowing about the buried manuscripts, the resistance networks, the secret photographs, adds crucial dimensions to that experience. The complete story of Auschwitz is one of the greatest crimes in human history, but also of extraordinary courage, resistance, and determination to preserve truth. Both dimensions are essential. The horror must never be minimized or forgotten. But the resistance, the documentation efforts, and the persistent pursuit of justice also deserve to be known and honored. These are the dark secrets of Auschwitz, not hidden to conceal the truth, but overlooked in simplified narratives. They are the stories that make the history more complete, more human, and ultimately more meaningful. They remind us that even in the face of systematic evil, individuals made choices to resist, to document, to help, or to participate. Understanding those choices and their consequences remains essential to ensuring that such evil is never repeated and that those who fought against it, often at the cost of their lives, are never forgotten.